welcome again to the second session of the Financial Academy Forum, and this is the final session to speak more about innovative or innovation or innovative solutions in the human resources. I would like to welcome the moderator of the session, Christian Kwal, the Senior Manager at Ernst and Young, EY. I'd like also to welcome Hamish Maiden, Vice President at Center for Creative Leadership, and also I'd like to welcome Corey Block, the Professor of Strategic Management at Monarch Business, and he is an award-winning strategist. Also Matthew Griffin, and he is award-winning futurist. Also, he is an international keynote speaker. Moving ahead to the moderator of this session to further speak about this, Mr. Christian Cowell, the floor is yours to speak about innovation in the development of human resources. Thank you very much.
Watching this knowledge gap increase, we need to start employing some of those innovative talent development strategies now. We need to start talking about things outside of the box to address these issues that are impacting the workforce of the future. So before we get into those very fascinating topics, I just want to take a step back and talk about talent development. Where have we come from? What is the history? How has it grown and evolved over the years? So to start us off, I'm going to ask Hamish, if you don't mind, what has been the evolution of talent development?
Sure. Well, thank you, Christine. Well, I think first of all, we need to recognize the tremendous advancements that's been made in the kingdom here. It's only been, in the last 6 or 8 years, you can see such a transformation in the talent that is around you, and you can really feel that everywhere, from the second that you land in at the airport, through to the hotels that you go to, through the conversations that you have. And I actually believe that in the kingdom here, there's actually some good examples of some real innovation in how do you develop talent, because the kingdom has done that in the last 6 months, in the last 6 years. And it's accelerated, right? So you can feel that in the people that you speak to. But fundamentally, talent development fundamentally has tried to answer one question, and that is what is the most effective way to develop leaders, right? What's the most effective way of doing that? And there's many, many things that have been tried. And they focus on 2 areas. We talked earlier on in the previous panel around functional technical skills that you need, especially in the financial services industry. And we also talked about critical competencies that are needed for leadership. And I think somewhere along the conversation we talked about, how CEOs and leaders of transformation still believe that despite all of this, that a lot of initiatives don't quite meet the objectives that have been set. So typically what happens, you develop your strategy, your vision for the future, you define what skills you need, you build your competency model, and then you engage people on learning and development journeys, right? And that process is roughly $18 billion business. And there's hundreds of providers, hundreds of thousands of practitioners, and I'd argue millions of people that have been on some of these programs. So the question is, why do people say that it's still not enough? Why is there a talent gap when you've got this whole ecosystem that's been working for years and years to try and do that? And I think one of the things that really has come up is, one of the challenges is that when you send people on leadership development programs, of which the kingdom has done a lot, what we find from the research is that you come back and you're entering a system which isn't geared to support you, right? Changing behaviors and leadership competencies requires an ecosystem approach. You can't go back into a system where everything stays the same. So part of the challenge that we found is that the ecosystem hasn't changed. So how things are evolving, to answer your question, how things are evolving is that organizations are now starting to see that you need to have a support infrastructure, coaching, mentoring, reviews, so that we make sure that we're supporting people as they're going on developmental journeys.
Yeah, thank you. And Matt, I'd like to ask you next to sort of build on that as a futurist. How would you say that this evolution of talent management practices will impact the future of financial services specifically? And you can look at, say, 5 years, 10 years down the road if you wish. Oh.
Your mic.
Switch it on.
Technology, indeed.
There we go.
There we go.
Hello. When we have a look at talent development, there's a number of things that we actually need to realize. So firstly, the vast majority of people today are still taught in the same way that we taught over 100 years ago. Now, we had organizations on stage earlier that talked about a difficulty in hiring people, which is trying to link those people's motivations with the company's purpose, but with also a talent shortage. Now, increasingly, every organization on the planet is becoming a technology company that sells stuff, something or other. Like, increasingly, if you look at JP Morgan. JP Morgan spend $15 billion a year now. They increased their budget by $3 billion because they are a technology company first that then sells financial services. So when we have a look at talent development, I guarantee that in 2025, 2030, we'll be sitting here and the executives of those same large organizations will be saying, you know what, we can't get enough quantum computer scientists, quantum computer artificial intelligence data scientists or programmers, encryption specialists, and so on and so forth. So the vast majority of talent programs today are based on that tomorrow kind of looks a bit like today, but a little bit more digital with coding thrown in or whatever it happens to be. Tomorrow is significantly different. So when we have a look at, for example, the future of the financial services sector, there are multiple disruptions. So we've got operational disruption, where we have artificial intelligence, quantum computers, we have robotic process automation, digitization, and cloud coming in, DevOps, etc. When we have a look at the future of the financial services industry from a structural perspective, a global perspective, you have traditional banks, you have Fintechs that are trying to go after the traditional bank's market share, you have decentralized finance organizations that are trying to take share from the Fintechs and the banks. So for example, how many of you are actually looking at Roblox or Minecraft or Epic as a future bank? I speak with regulators all over the world. No one. And yet Roblox has 300 million users. Quite a lot of your children probably play it. It makes 95% of its money from microtransactions. They have their own coin, but it's not a crypto coin yet. They are almost the perfect example of a digital, decentralized finance platform that can take advantage of the metaverse, tokenization, NFTs, and Web3, which alone are an $8 trillion market opportunity. On the back of that, we have open source hedge funds, because as a hedge fund, if I take my data and I use homomorphic encryption, I can push that data to scientists, data scientists, anywhere on the planet, ask them to make me a better data scientist's model for investing, and if that model wins and beats the stock market, then they get a return. There's an organization called Numeri, which is now beating the market by 34%. They just raised 150 million in capital. Then in addition to that, when we have a look at Hong Kong and we have a look at Wall Street, the sort of fourth structural disruption coming into the banking sector is the rise of fully autonomous, decentralized finance organizations like hedge funds. And we've seen 3 of those. And to quote the CEOs who created these fully autonomous hedge funds and financial services companies, they've said, if we die, this keeps running.
Yeah.
And that's before we talk about quantitative investing. So when we have a look at the future of training, increasingly we are collaborating with artificial intelligences. You can train in virtual reality. But how many of you are being trained and certified on the things that come next? Because probably not many. You're being trained on the things that come today, the needs of the industry today, which then means if that's the status quo in 2025, we sit here and we talk about the talent shortage and why didn't we see all these new things coming? But we did. We just weren't paying attention to them.
Thanks. That actually leads me into the next question, which is really related to those developing of competencies of the future. And I'd like to ask Corey, please, if he would describe what he thinks might be the most important or desirable skills for HR teams to focus on and develop in their employees, just looking at it from a technical perspective in financial services. And then I'll ask Hamish to weigh in on the behavioral or leadership skills.
Yeah, definitely. First of all, I want to speak to the leaders in the room. If you're a leader in one of the banks or the organizations here, say VP, director, and up, and you did not understand what Matt was talking about, that is a red flag, okay? Secondly, in terms of artificial intelligence and what we're doing in HR departments, there's a lot of things that are being done now. We have artificially intelligent performance management. Artificially intelligent scheduling has been around for years. We have artificially intelligent temperature seekers so that we can take the emotional temperature of employees and we can curate the employee experience on a day-to-day basis using machine learning. That's amazing stuff, but it requires that the HR professionals themselves in the HR department have the vocabulary. They need the expertise on the front end to figure out how an algorithm is engineered, determine patterns of that engineered algorithm, and to make sure that they're removing the biases along the way as they're doing the training for the algorithm. They need vocabulary for that. On the back end, they need to be amazing data storytellers. Data storytellers can take the incredible information that our machines are producing for us and turn it into real-world application. So they can tell the story that the data is saying, and they can be translators between the machines and the employees, or the machines and the leadership in the executive class. These are really important skills, and I think that's where our HR staff need to be upskilled. The challenge in upskilling, I find, I've been living in the region for 15 years, and it's actually not very different than it is from North America or Europe on this, is that the desire or tolerance for upskilling after the age of 40 significantly declines. We tend, and I'm saying that as a 47-year-old, so I'm saying that, like, we need to put more effort into upskilling ourselves consistently and making ourselves into consistently learning leaders, rather than just expecting our organizations to be consistently learning organizations. So we need to set the bar on that.
Great. We're going to come back to AI in a little bit too.
Sure.
So, but Hamish,
Yeah,
any
sure.
thoughts?
Just to add to that, I think first of all, again, the work that this region has done to define competencies that have been needed has been very rigorous. We've done a lot of work in the region here for the last 10 years. There's no shortage of competencies that we're trying to develop. And I think they really fall under 2 kind of categories, right? One is the competencies that are needed for running the business, transforming the organization, whether it's leading digital transformation, driving innovation. There's a set of skill sets that's required for that. And I think the other part, which is becoming more and more important, is around the competencies that you need that are more human-centered. It's around driving empathy, creating psychological safe environments, right, which is becoming more and more important now. The challenge I see, right, is that actually if it's being done to you, if I'm being sent on a program and I've got to acquire all these competencies, well, I'm going to be a superhuman because the list is so long. And I think that's part of the challenge that we're having, is that sometimes we don't focus enough on what are the critical 4 or 5 or 2 or 3. We build competency libraries that have got 10, 12, 13, 14 competencies, and just changing 1 or 2 is hard enough, and yet here we are trying to design programs, and we were trying to create the superhuman. So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
Now, Matt, you described a future, and there's an obvious gap. There's an obvious gap. So how do you see HR professionals and organization address that gap in terms of the current, skills that we have versus where we need to go?
Yeah. So the first thing I would say basically is, as an HR professional, unlearn everything that you have learned. Now, the reason why I say that is because the new world typically doesn't operate in the same way as the old world. And I will give you an example. How long would it take somebody to disrupt the entire global financial services industry? Is it A, 10 years, B, 5 years, C, 2 years, or is it D, 1 day? The answer is D. It is 1 day. I will tell you how, and we've already seen it. So today, basically, as a financial services organization, we have 3.5 billion people on the planet connected. It used to be 100 odd years ago that if you wanted 50 million people to adopt your product, it would take about 75 years. Pokemon Go reached 50 million users within 17 days. Call of Duty reached 50 million users within 3 days. Mark Zuckerberg, when he released DM, which is a cryptocurrency, sort of, made up of a basket of different currencies, when Mark Zuckerberg released Facebook's DM cryptocurrency, he could have changed the entire global financial system as well as the state's control of money overnight. And that is in the words of the chairman of the People's Bank of China, the chairman of the European Central Bank, the US Federal Reserve, and the Bank of England. And the way that he could have done that is because he could have released DM at 9 a.m. on a Monday morning. And 5 hours later, if he'd hit the right levers, hundreds of millions of people could have been using it. In fact, if he'd hit all the right levers, he could have hit 3.5 billion users within a week. So we are already at the point where we can disrupt the global financial services system within a day. But the regulators said no. If it hadn't been for the regulators, Meta, Facebook, would now be the new Ant Financial. So when we try to prepare for this future, you have to unlearn all of the things that you've learned. You have to look out 5 to 10 years to try to figure out what are the needs of your organization in the next 5 to 10 years. Because as HR professionals, it's all very well hiring software developers, AI developers, data scientists today, cloud engineers. Goldman Sachs, 2/3 of Goldman Sachs are data scientists. They've automated all of their IPO staff, their equities teams. So look out to the future, try to identify talent shortages in the future. What are the jobs of the future, essentially? Then start building internal capability that allows you to take your existing organization that you have with you today into the future. So I'll give you an example. Accenture looked into the future and they saw that these jobs existed. So these were things like blockchain, data science, quantum technologies, digital transformation, all that sort of stuff. So they looked into the future. They then went to 17,000 people in their company and said, by the way, your roles are going to be made redundant because they're going to be automated. Barclays, HSBC, and so on and so forth say that in the next 5 to 10 years, 50% of finance roles will be automated. Accenture put a mentorship program in place and a training program in place that meant when they did eventually manage to automate 17,000 people's jobs, no one was made redundant. They were all moved into new roles. So all of the human capital that was within Accenture, those 17,000 people, that wasn't lost. They weren't made redundant. They went with the organization. So unlearn, explore the future, build mentor programs and training programs that give you the skills that you need today while also developing the skills that you need in the future. And for example, when we have a look at the Financial Academy, is there an entrepreneur track? Because I'm now teaching my children who are the age of 10 how to build a bank. We are using Starling's Bank in a Box product, Rails Bank, which means we have access to global banking with 5 lines of code in 5 minutes. And my kids are starting to develop crypto. My kids can run a bank. If my kids can run a bank, everyone can run a bank. Your competition is everybody. Mercedes, Barclays, whoever it happens to be, Roblox, everyone in the future from a payments perspective, a savings perspective, is your competitor. Nike, Apple, Google, Tencent, Alibaba, Facebook, whoever.
Yeah. Corey, I'm sure you have thoughts on this too. I can feel it.
No, it's all right. I'm totally with you, Matt. The whole financial service industry it's been disrupted already a couple of times. Ant Financial is one that you brought up, I think is an amazing case study. I mean, they have 1.5 times the valuation of Citigroup, which makes them the largest financial services company in the world, and they have 10 times fewer employees. So they're very heavily automated. It's extremely lean, it's extremely efficient, and that's how they do it. And that's where we need to get to. Not that we can do more with fewer employees, but that the employees that we have are far better tooled and better suited to the future that we're expecting than they are today. I'm absolutely with you. I think internally we need to be able to upskill better the staff that we already have. And in order to do that, we have artificial intelligence that can help. We have AI in L&D that can prescribe certain kinds of training and leak that training out to employees during 15 or 20-minute blocks that are not being used in their regular schedule. So imagine that the HR chatbot that you have for your employees now to answer questions about policies and how many leave days they have left in the year. Imagine that chatbot pops up and says, "Hey, Ahmed, I see you've got 20 minutes. How about let's play a game?" And then you've gamified the upskilling process so that Ahmed is being already prepared for the next role that the machine has decided that he will take in a few years from now when it is necessary. But he's slowly being upskilled through this process of gamification and learning and development that's already decided and strategized by the machine. That is an amazing technology that already exists. And then imagine that in a couple of years from now, Ahmed is retooled, he's shaped, his entire position, his whole department is made redundant through automation, and he's simply moved from one desk into another desk. And he's okay, because he's already been taken care of, he knows the skills. That's what we're talking about, and that requires a tremendous amount of thought leadership today, and it requires strength in leadership today. It requires courage in leadership today.
Yeah, if I can just add to that, I think one of the things that comes up to me as you describe that, Corey, is around how do we democratize the ability to learn and develop, right? Because it's historically or traditionally been reserved for the elite few, and especially in terms of leadership. And so if we're trying to get scale transformations across an organization, and we need more and more people to think like that, how do we make that available to the organization at a cost that is acceptable, as the previous panel said, a cost that is acceptable in a way that is acceptable to the society here. And so part of that is how human beings learn, develop, and grow, right? And so how do you unlock mindsets and open mindsets? It's not just about learning and developing a new skill, it's also about unlocking something in your brain and thinking about how do we learn and grow as individuals, as a collective, and as a society.
One of the challenges that we're facing in the organizations where I work is that there's this expectation that learning and growing is reserved.
Right.
And it's not technocratically reserved. It's not reserved for the people who perform the best. It's reserved for people who network the best. And I don't know if you struggle with that in your organizations, but in the organizations that I've been working in, we've been working on using machine learning and artificial intelligence to level the playing field, so that employees are judged by their engagement level, their performance level, and their interest in learning and development. And that's how, and so that the promotions are recommended by the machine to the leaders without names on them. They don't know who they're promoting until after they've made the decision based on the data. And that levels the playing field for them.
And I think, sorry,
No, go ahead.
and I think it's a good switch, right, in terms of how we think around developing people. Because again, historically, it's something that's been done to you, and we know about human behavior. Something that's being done to you, you're being sent on a program where you're being asked to learn, then your ability to absorb that information and to live with it is limited. Whereas I think if we can find a way of transferring that ownership to the individual, so it's intrinsic, and find a culture that fosters that, I think we'll see an increase in the take-up, right, of learning and development.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, I think the days are now gone where we see training given to people as a reward. And,
Yeah,
and,
100%.
and
Absolutely.
it's now has to have a return. And we're expecting people to come back and share what they've learned and apply it back in the workplace. So it's definitely changing. So Hamish, you actually mentioned leadership, and I just wanted to just draw on that a little bit more in terms of what is the important role that leadership plays in the future of work?
Well, it's a great question, right? The important role of leadership. And I think as organizations are becoming increasingly complex, market environments are becoming complex, dealing with technology is becoming increasingly complex, leaders need to provide an environment in which their staff can actually learn and grow. So that's one. How do you do that? By providing opportunities that we've discussed. I think the other really important piece that leaders need to be playing, and this has come up in some groundbreaking research that Google did, was around high-performing teams and around what is the key ingredient of high-performing teams. And it came out with one thing, and that is psychological safety. And time again, if you can create an environment where, if you want to innovate, you can create an environment where you can take risks and not be blamed for it. If these can be encouraged, if you can draw lessons learned from the experiments that you make inside the organization, if you can allow your staff to challenge the status quo, ask questions, and create an environment where there's a lot of psychological safety, then that accelerates the performance of the teams and therefore their development. So that's one really important role I think that leadership places as we think about the future of work. Second thing I'd add in, and I'll let the other people comment here, is around there's been a lot of talk around employee well-being and empathy, and especially in other parts of the world, creating an environment in which people feel valued is critical, especially now with all the forces that have been going on in the last 2 years. So thinking about well-being, and there's lots of examples of organizations, of actions that organizations have taken to provide and care for their employees and to make sure that they're being looked after. Guys,
Any
anything
thoughts
to
from you guys
add
at
to
all
that?
on leadership?
So when you're looking at the future, everything changes. We have 5 generations of employees within the workforce at the moment. I speak to plenty of leaders, so CEOs of large Fortune 50 organizations that say, this thing digital, I think we should do it. But they don't necessarily understand what digital is. They don't really necessarily understand the kind of world that we're going into. So unless a leader actually has a point of view of the future, and some leaders might only have short tenures, in which case some aren't interested, it's going to be very difficult for that leader to understand what is happening in the future, what that means to their industry, their organization, and their employees, and then create a embracive set of strategies that bring the employees along. So leaders have got to be willing to learn Leaders have got to be willing to listen to uncomfortable new truths. So last night, one of the conversations that we actually had was, how could the Saudi government, for example, fund all of the infrastructure investment in the kingdom while at the same time eliminating all of the taxes on citizens? Now, a leader might think that that's impossible. Politicians will think it's impossible. But in Miami, we're doing it. So we have a platform, it's called CityCoin, that is used to mine something called Miami Coin. Citizens within Miami mine cryptocurrency. They get 70% of the reward. The city gets 30% of the reward. So far, the city has got $80 million from that, which is 25% of the city of Miami's annual budget. The mayor of Miami now wants to get enough rewards to cover his entire annual budget, which is $400 million. So when he gets to that point, he can go to the citizens of Miami and go, I still have the money to build you new parks, new infrastructure, new schools, all the things that we need to do as a city. But the good news is you no longer have to pay taxes. So that's one example. So when we talk about unlearning other things, another conversation that we had last night that I've had with organizations like Lloyds of London, Citigroup, those kinds of ones, I can disrupt your bank with your fridge. Well, if you want to know how you do that, my fridge, when I use things out of it, it's a smart fridge from Samsung. You take products out of it, it understands when you've run out of something, milk, for example. It knows, because it's connected to the blockchain and it's a smart fridge, it knows that 10 million other people in the Middle East have run out of milk. It forms a buying consortium. It goes to Carrefour and says, I want to buy 10 million pints of milk. I'd normally buy milk at $1. Because it's created a buying consortium, it saves me 20 cents per pint of milk. The robo-advisor, bearing in mind that in the quantitative investing space, robo-advisors outperformed human advisors by 64%. The robo-advisor says, what would you like me to do with the money that I've saved on buying your groceries? So robotic customers are a trend. What do you want me to do with the money that I saved on buying your groceries? I say, I'll tell you what, put it into a fund. The robo-advisor puts it into a fund, that grows, and at some point, I cash out of that fund, and I can either buy myself a new Lamborghini, or an artificial intelligence can pay me a universal basic income. Now, when you run the numbers just in the UK alone, that fridge would end up with $362 billion of cash in the bank. And this is something we're building with Samsung. So as I say, when it comes to leadership, you can either continue to focus on the core of your organization and making it operationally better, or you can also look at some of these new things that are coming along and think, how do we embrace these? Experiment with them. Look at how you build revenue streams out of the core. Turn your bank or financial services organization into a multi-sided business, because that's what the tech giants do. Otherwise, you get squashed. So leadership, you have to feel the pain. You have to experience the potential and the opportunity. And when you get out there and explore, then you bring that back in-house, create a vision, a strategy, basically, and then you start evolving your organization. But then you're future fit.
Yeah.
And if I could just add to that, I think leaders need to create the right culture for that to happen, right? It's not the heroic leader that needs to do it. It's the culture that needs to happen.
Absolutely.
I'd like to add, honestly, look, again, if you didn't understand the fridge metaphor, banking is going to be an issue for you. So please get that, right? It's going to be a challenge. Okay, so look, first of all, yes, leaders need to adapt because everything is changing. Secondly, the good news is everything stays the same, remember that psychologically and neurochemically, you are exactly the same as the humans that led up to your birth. Okay, you have 10,000 generations of successfully surviving humans leading up to the fact that you are alive. You exist because all 10,000 generations that came before you, they did it, they adapted. And we're amazing adaptation machines. We're absolutely incredible at this. So this is the good news. The other good news is that the environment that we're creating is an abundant environment. It's not an environment of scarcity and violence like we used to live in. Our ancestors had to adapt to scarcity, to famine, to flood, to war, to disease, things that now we can conquer. So we're adapting to an era of abundance that we've never experienced before. And that's the good news. The good news is, up here, we're all still the same.
Can I add one more to that as
Sure.
well, as you've got the juices flowing now a little bit? I think, I think in the scenarios that we've been describing, also what's different is that leaders need to be able to connect with leaders of other organizations as well. So, there are opportunities to grow for an organization, and to capture some of those opportunities requires leaders to have the ability to influence without hierarchy, right? So build out the ecosystem, and that in itself is a different mindset and a different skill set as well. And that exists, with other organizations, but even inside large complex organizations as well, because we know that some of the challenges that leaders face is around siloed thinking and lack of collaboration, and that still stays the same, right, in the world that we're in.
That's
the
right.
ability to break down silos, collaborate, create the environment in which people can experiment, learn, and grow, and be. Well, I think the phrase that we've heard is around network thinkers, right? Ecosystem thinkers. Connect with other organizations that can help create compelling value propositions.
Very good. So I'm going to ask one last question of the panel so we can give a few minutes to questions. So if you have any questions for the panelists, please submit that through the application. So my final question, just to bring it all back home to the HR space and L&D space, what would be your one key takeaway for HR professionals to consider when it comes to preparing their organizations for this changing workforce? Matt, do you want to try first?
Yeah, sure. So my piece of advice would be build for tomorrow, experience tomorrow, and then today will take care of itself. Because in the future, my children could be coming at you with their very own GEMS Academy funded bank. They will not be operating in the same way that the vast majority of financial services organizations in this room are operating. They will be operating off a fundamentally different rule book that assumes that one person can make a difference to billions of people on the planet, which we've already seen with the growth of unicorns and decacorns. So build for tomorrow. And I'll sort of give another little example, if I can. On the previous panel, one of the chaps said, we have a problem attracting talent. We see this throughout the global financial services community worldwide. One of my clients is JP Morgan. JP Morgan have built a bank branch in the metaverse, which is a virtual reality construct. Now, to the vast majority of people, this might just look like a nice piece of marketing. But actually, it does a number of different things. Firstly, by building a bank branch in the metaverse, JP Morgan are trying to figure out how do they do it. It's an experiment. Secondly, they are signaling to people that they want to hire that JP Morgan is doing interesting things and that it's an interesting place to work. And thirdly, they are positioning themselves to be the premium lender of choice for digital assets like digital realty, NFTs, in the metaverse, which is an $8 trillion opportunity. So with one experiment, building a bank branch in the metaverse, JP Morgan is hitting experimentation with the future, attracting new talent to do interesting things, and then exploring an $8 trillion market opportunity. How many of you are experimenting with things that are outside of your comfort zone or your core?
Thank you. Corey?
Yeah, I'd say my one key takeaway is to balance technology with psychology. Remember, we're humans after all, not resources, right? Humans, not resources. So let's take care of each other and make sure that we're working as hard as we can to be as inclusive as possible and leave none of us behind.
Thank you. Hamish?
Yeah, I think I agree, Corey. I think, I mean, I call it put your people first, right?
Yeah.
Create the irresistible experience for your people. And if you can create that, and if you understand what you need to create that irresistible employee experience, some of the things that you've heard today might be easier to relay. And that's along the lines of, you know, well-being, employee engagement, psychological safety, opportunities to learn and grow and develop and experiment. So the irresistible employee experience, that would be my one takeaway.
Great, thank you. So I have my first question from the audience, and it's from Matt. You mentioned virtual reality learning.
Yeah.
Well, since it's quite challenging to find content designers in the market for this type of learning, what would you do to develop this internally in the organization through upskilling, and what would you advise?
Yeah, so in the virtual reality space, frankly, I suppose a very quick story. My children are 8 and 10. They will be coming into the workforce in 2030, 2035. Industrial age education systems are absolutely not fit for purpose for the life that they're going to be going into in 2030, 2035. So over the past 18 months, we've been building a virtual reality university. It's one of the world's first. We built it on the Unity engine. So when we start having a look at the use of virtual reality basically within training, there's a whole variety of new things that are actually coming in. So firstly, developers are about $50,000 a pop. And there's quite a lot of different developers that you can actually hire. We've gone through that experience ourselves. If you base it on something like the Unity engine, then as the Unity engine improves in quality, you will move from these sort of rather basic looking avatars to increasingly lifelike and real environments. And then from a virtual reality perspective, we start bringing in simulation. So for example, artificial intelligence simulation that allows people to collaborate with machines in new ways to find different asset classes, to do different things, run different predictive models, understand different things, all that sort of stuff. So if you want to build a virtual reality learning experience, Unity engine, a couple of developers, set them a task, do it. It's not as difficult as people think, but have a play.
Okay, great. Second question here, we have, is a lot of changes are taking place in the financial industry. As an individual, what should I do to maximize my gain from these changes? Is there any specific roadmap, learning library, or specific skill sets that you think I should be my number one focus area? Corey, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, in the financial, you mean in HR financial services,
No,
or in the industry in
just
general?
in the financial industry overall.
Yeah, honestly, there has to be a lot of reading. You're going to have to take some short courses, Udemy. There's tons of courses out there that you can tap into that'll teach you the basics of blockchain technology. So it'll give you the vocabulary of it. It'll teach you the basics of artificial intelligence. And it's very inexpensive, if not free. There's tons of free material on YouTube. So really the challenge is, how motivated are you to learn the vocabulary that you will need to remain relevant in your industry as it evolves around you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would build on that. It's also about the mindset, developing your agile mindset, developing a curiosity for things.
Mm-hmm.
So there's many ways of not necessarily having to become an IT expert, but to dig into being curious about the way the world is going.
Yeah, if I could just add, I think even in the financial services industries, I would imagine that the rule of thumb around the number of projects that fail and why they fail around the human side of things. So my advice would be around, don't forget that there's a massive human element which is critical to make sure that whatever you want to be developing is successful. So you need to learn as much as you can, read as much as you can, acquire as much skills as you can, and don't forget that one of the critical failure points is around the human side. So figure out what that means in your context.
It's 84%, by the way.
There you go.
Yeah,
I'm sitting next to two guys that know all the numbers about everything. So
yeah, look, just Google Forbes and my name and 84%, and you will find the article where I make the argument that it is a human element that leads to the failure of digital transformation. It's not the technology. Technology is great. It's the people. The people are challenging.
Well, and the need for more change management practices, or more
100%.
robust change management
Yes,
practices
100%.
in these transformations. Yeah. So on the people side of it, I have a question for Hamish, and it's around employee engagement. So thinking about all the changes that are coming, all the automation, all the AI, all that, how is that impacting employee engagement, in your opinion?
well, I think there's several things, and these guys comment as well. One, the ability for an organization to measure employee engagement is advancing. You've got new technologies that are very, very easy to measure and to try and predict, right? Because employee engagement ebbs and flows, and there's trends around that. So that's one. I think around engagement, it's going to be easy to measure. I think the other thing as well around the key drivers of engagement, and we've talked about some of those, right, are around this feeling of creating an empowered environment. People are autonomous. So if you want to drive engagement in your organization, create a culture where people feel empowered, and create a culture where people have the autonomy to experiment and try new things.
And the freedom to make mistakes.
Freedom to make mistakes, right? And also the environment in which they can ask for help. We talked about psychological safety as well. Failing is not the end of everything. It's actually a learning opportunity. So if you can create that, then that helps towards driving engagement in your organization.
Yeah, look, with the speed of change now, it's so much cheaper for you as an organization to pay for the mistakes of your employees than to keep employees that won't take the risk associated with learning those things that make mistakes. It's so much cheaper to break things than to not move fast.
And if I could repeat something that was said earlier on, two words that stuck out for me was around trust and confidence. So imagine if we could create an environment that fostered trust, and what that would do to employee engagement.
Yeah. So I think our time is up. So thank you. I just want to say thank you so much to my lovely colleagues today for sharing all your wonderful insights with all of us. My final thought for all of you in the audience is please take a look at the screen here and take a picture of that, because we really would welcome connecting with you on LinkedIn. We can definitely help you and talk about this in your organization. So please do connect with us on LinkedIn. So thank you very much from me. Thank you from all of us for your time today. And
Thank you.
Hope you enjoyed.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christine.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot for Miss Christine Kwal, the Senior Manager at Terence and Young. Thanks for the speakers and hot welcome. Welcome to the Saudi Arabia, the land of the future investment. Thank you. أهلا بالجميع وشكرا لكم الحقيقة على تفاعلكم على تجاوبكم. شكرا لضيوفنا اللي راح.
For all, and thanks ever so much, and welcome everyone here in this big land of investment. We do invest in the future, and we have ample opportunity for future investments and current investment. Investment is in you as great human resources that work in the financial sector institutions with all the different branches. Our male and female citizens, we feel very proud of you. When I speak in 2008, where, of course, the economies of the world countries were negatively impacted, except for the Saudi economy. Why? Because it is so strong and it is supported by wise leaders and professionals, and also enhancing and capitalizing and investing in human resources. Again and again, thank you so much. We are coming to the end of our Financial Academy Forum. Thanks for the Financial Academy, for the new phase, for the new trend. Thanks ever so much for all our partners, whether the strategic partners, sponsors, supporters, organizers, the media partners, and you as audiences. Thank you ever so much, Iraq and Cheese. I appreciate it.